Hello everyone, welcome to this new video for my tier list of Star Wars Unlimited, and today we're talking about aggression heroism. Aggression heroism, the aggressive color by definition. All the aggro decks in the game are based on that aggressive aggressive gameplay, and it's a very straightforward color, so hopefully I can wrap this video relatively short, but don't uh, don't put your hopes up. Moving on, starting by the first card is gonna be Spec Force Soldier. Spec Force Soldiers has been the main tool um, for aggro deck to disable enemy sentinels. It's cheap, it puts a body on the battlefield, and it removes sentinels. It's not only useful against sentinel, of course, it can be squeezed at any time during the game to add an initial body that can put some pressure. It can allow you to do a double one drop opening more consistently. And as we're gonna see, I'm not gonna repeat this argument 20 times, but basically anything that has the rebel keyword and has the heroism aspect is gonna be very good for an aggressive deck. And that's going to be for a cause I believe in. You want to have a critical mass of heroism card, and there's a ton of very strong rebel synergies in aggressive strategy, notably wing leader and fleet lieutenant, that really help into putting some pressure on the opponent, and they require a certain amount of rebels to make that work. So if you rebel and if you're heroism, that's a huge boost on your pedigree. So where do I rank Spectral Soldiers? I think, okay, so I'm gonna rank this either very high B tier or relatively low A tier. I think I like to put this low A tier. I think that this card single-handedly makes expensive Sentinel unit uh, not so great because you have such a cheap way to disable them. It was kind of a little revolution when it came out because it made very big Sentinels like Obi-Wan like a lot worse. And I think this impact that it had on the meta is enough to rate it A tier. It's an auto include in all the aggressive decks, and it's just a great card. So it's a specialized tool, yes, and it's not always great, but it had a big impact enough on the meta to be deserving of being at least A tier. So I put it as A tier. Next we got Green Squadron Awing. So basically it's interesting because if you look at the history of the previous season, basically the introduction of Awing is the moment where we started seeing aggressive decks actually being powerful. It was not the introduction of Sabine, it was the introduction of Awing that made it okay, now we can play aggro decks. And this card is simply just extremely strong. It is basically a 3/3 for 2 but in space, which is just incredible. So from that argument alone, it should be better than Battlefield Marine. Obviously, it only has 3 attack on attack, so obviously the opponent can trade with it fairly easily and keep the unit alive. So it's not. It has some counter plays, notably Consortium Star Viper does counter it pretty well. Um, Imperial Interceptor does counter it pretty well. So it is one of the best 2-drop in the game, but it has a lot of counters. So because it has a lot of counters, I cannot possibly put this card in S tier, but it's going to be very high A tier. I'm going to place this over Echo Base Defender as the super high tier A tier. I think it has a little bit too many out counters to be deserving of the S tier status, but it is an incredibly strong card, and it completely turned the situation for aggro decks and turned aggro decks into what they are today. So uh, obviously the fact that it's a space unit is so relevant in aggro because then you can have, depending on what your opponent do, now you have the flexibility to go either in space or in air depending on the situation. So I'm putting this I hate here, and yeah, some people might put this in S tier, and I wouldn't be disagreeing with this. Like once again, it's a very subtle difference, low S tier or high A tier. As I said earlier, it just has a little bit too many hard counters. We talked about Interceptor, Consortium Star Vipers. They can just attack into it, get your life back, and kill it, and not even take a scratch. That's some major weaknesses, but also yeah. So yeah, moving on, we got Sabine. So Sabine Wren is also sort of a 3-3 for 2. Uh, when it attacks, the ability that makes her non-attackable is very rarely relevant, but it can sometimes be, and often people forget that this ability exists, which is probably the strongest asset of this ability. Is that yeah, people sometimes forget about it, so that can really be very annoying when that happens. Yeah, she's basically a 3-3 attack, but she's a bit better than this. Sometimes she can kill a 2-drop, deal 1 damage to the base. Sometimes she deal 1 damage to the unit that has 1 health. It doesn't take any damage back. So it's a little bit better than Raid. But I would rather hit being a 3-3 for 2, to be quite honest, of course, because it means that now Battlefield Marine can attack her and kill her without dying on the way back, or any other 3-3 for that matter, including Eco-Base Defender and stuff. So she's really good. She's also a Spectre, so she can be played in an Era deck. So what do I think about Sabine? I think obviously she is amazing, but how amazing is she? So she's definitely worse than Battlefield Marine. Is she worse enough that she deserves to be in S tier? I don't know. Uh, or is she's either a high A tier or a low S tier. It's sometimes it's yeah, it's a bit it's a difficult one to rate. Um, yeah. Hmm. It's the same for Awing, right? Like there's an argument for Awing being S tier. I'm gonna put Sabine in I tier because I think that, but honestly, because once again she doesn't trade so well into like the 3-3s. Like she want her to be aggressive, and sometimes she gets killed without killing something back. Um, so it's kind of a big deal. So I said earlier that 2-3-4-2 was not a great stat line. Obviously, Sabine is not a real 2-3-4-2 because she has this extra +1 damage that really makes up for her stat line being weaker. So I'm gonna put it top 8 here. I think she's incredible, but I think she's just missing the little something to put in S tier. Once again, the fact that she doesn't trade with a lot of things in the meta is a kind of a problem. So yeah. Once again, you could make this argument she's S tier, and I wouldn't disagree with that. And I wouldn't necessarily disagree with this. It's just a very subtle difference between the two, honestly. But she's obviously a great card and an auto include in any white red deck. Moving on, we got Fighter for Freedom. When this card was first spoiled, I thought this card was going to be insane. Um, Basically, just 3-4 is a great start line. She's Saboteur, she can ignore enemy Sentinels, and she has an ability that deals that 1 damage to the base every time you play a red unit. As we know, there's tons of great cheap red unit in the game that will help you trigger Fighter for Freedom often. And yeah, and recently she got even better because now she's in a great combination with Ewing Reinforcement. You play Ewing Reinforcement, you pull 3 red units alongside a Fighter for Freedom, and you can deal 6 damage. That's pretty sick. If you even have double Fighter for Freedom plus a 1-drop, you will deal 6 damage, which is crazy. So uh, she has gotten a lot better as time goes by. So yeah, she's very powerful. She's rebel. She's rebel. She's trooper. She has the heroism aspect. She has everything to be successful. She's gonna be A tier. She doesn't have the same sort of impact as the other card. I think her main weakness is that she doesn't have an immediate impact on the game. So you play her, sometimes she gets dealt with, and she gets dealt with by quite a few things. And when that happens, then she doesn't really bring anything. In an aggro deck, a 3-drop that doesn't have an immediate impact on the game can sometimes be a bit underwhelming, but I still believe she is very strong. I'm gonna place her basically in A tier between the Reinforcement Walker and the Super Laser Blast. I think she's just great. Moving on. So far, 4 cards in A tier. That is quite scary. Moving on, we got Red 3. So Red 3 is another card very similar to Fighter for Freedom in a sense that it's a card that you don't want to let alive too long because the raid 1 that he provides is very high value. give raid 1 to all the Heroism unit because you're playing a lot of Heroism card because of for a cause I believe in. It basically gives raid 1 to everything. It's a card that I was originally not super excited about because it's very similar to General Veers that basically gives +1/+1 to everybody for 3. This one gives effectively +1/+0 for 3 and it's only on attack. So I was like, oh, well, this is not amazing, right? But there's a major difference is that Red 3 is a space unit, meaning that it is a lot more difficult to interact with. There's far fewer removal, far fewer ambush unit, far fewer, generally speaking, units in space, which means that Red 3 is going to require more specific tools to be dealt with. And there's as I said, a huge value of this card staying alive for a little too long. Not only that, it's also in the context of red-white. It's in the context of red-white and in red-white it is very powerful. So I'm gonna place red 3 in the B tier. I think it's a very solid card, but just like for Fighter for Freedom, it can be dealt with and then not provide any value. I'm gonna rate this over Death Star Stormtrooper but below Constant Star Viper, which by the way is a great counter to red 3. Now that I think about it, I'm sorry, but I think I might have overrated Fighter for Freedom a little bit. Um, Fighter for Freedom or Red 3? This is an interesting one. Which one do I rate better? But they definitely belong to the same tier because they are both kind of 3-drops that can be answered kind of right away and don't provide any value if they are. So I personally rate Fighter for Freedom, especially with the more recent upgrades of the card. I personally rate Fighter for Freedom a bit higher than Red 3. But it's not much higher, so I'm gonna put it over Constant Star Viper. So yeah, I think it's more relative B tier. I think the reason why I'm rating Spec Force Soldiers A tier is because of the impact that it had on the game as a whole, in terms of how it made expensive Sentinel units very bad, just because that card exists. While those cards don't have the same sort of impact, they are very strong if left alive, but if they're not, then they can get killed fairly easily. So they're a very solid card. I think top of B tier makes sense for them. Okay, sorry for that little whoopsie. And next we got K2SO. So K2SO is the best 4-drop in the game. There's not that many 4-drop in this game, and good 4-drops are even less so. But among those 4-drops, K2SO, in my opinion, is one of the best. It is the best actually. Once again, Rebel, Heroism, is a 4/4. So not super easy to deal with, and when he's dealt with, he deals 3 damage to the base. I mean, he can sometimes discard a card, and there are decks that prefer the discard effect over the damage, especially decks, Jedi decks that plays 4th throw. So then you can really reduce the size of your opponent's hand, and then you can, and he makes 4th throw even more powerful. Also Overwhelm, it has tons of great combo with Heroic Sacrifice and the other card is Sneak Attack. It has lots of great synergies. It's good in aggro, it's good in mid-range. It's guaranteed damage, which is something that is extremely valuable for aggro. And once again, if not answered, it deals even more damage. This card is an absolute pain in the ass. When it came out, it was a huge boost to aggro. This is going to be an S tier card. K2SO is amazing. I'm going to put this over Awing. I'm going to put this between Power of the Dark Side and... I might actually rate this over Power of the Dark Side. This was such a high impact card when it came out. Yeah, and I'm going to place it there. Over, it's one of the most dangerous card in the game. Puts so much pressure, and the guaranteed damage is just excellent. So it's an absolute great card. Next we got Zeb Aurelios. Zeb is an interesting card that has the potential to completely destroy the opponent board. It's a card, but it has a couple of problems. First of all, it's a 5-drop that doesn't have immediate impact on the game. For him to use his ability, there needs to be a lot of things happening. First of all, he needs to be able to attack. He needs to be able to kill that unit without dying because he needs to complete the attack. And he also needs to deal 4 damage to a ground unit as well. That means there needs to be at least 2 ground units on the battlefield for this to actually be useful. So in the right situation, it's very strong, but it's really situational. It is also a card that is extremely easy to play around, so this is the reason why Zeb is very, very dependent on Energy Conversion Lab. If you're not playing Energy Conversion Lab, I think this card is pretty much, it's almost unplayable. If you are playing Energy Conversion Lab, however, it's a pretty strong card that can really take your opponent by surprise and really destroy his board. We've seen this card being played in some aggro decks, so we've seen this in Sabine, for example, as a way to playing ECL, as a way to kind of clean the board and put a big body on the battlefield at the same time. It is an option. It is not a very popular option though. It's something that at the end of the day is more of a control mid-rangey card. And right now we haven't seen any red, white, and green mid-range deck really shining at the competitive level. At least at the what we call the competitive level now, which is just people trying to figure out the game and play as well as they can. But anyway, Zeb Aurelius is strong with ECL. The fact that he's so dependent on ECL, and even with if you have access to ECL, he remains fairly situational. But he's a card that has a super high impact on the game when you play him right. So I'm gonna put it in C tier. This is the same kind of card as Rook in a sense that it's a card that can really do well in some very specific situation, but sometimes it just doesn't. So, but I'm gonna rate him a little bit lower because I think as a card, he's a 5 HP unit. He dies to a lot more things than Rook. He dies to Force Choke. He dies to Takedown. So I'm happy to place him. Yeah, between Mon Mothma and Seven Sisters seems to be a good place for him. Moving on, we got Blackone. So Blackone is an interesting concept, the idea of a top curve card that can basically discard your hand and then redraw your entire hand to give you like more to basically to give you gas for the late game. From my experience and from the experience of most aggro players, card draw in Star Wars Unlimited is rarely needed. There's definitely some situation where, oh, I wish I had some card draw here, but most of the time, more often than not, you're like, I don't need card draw. I can just finish the game before it comes to that. And the drawing 2 cards per turn, and without having to resource, usually is enough for you to not need the card draw. The effect is triggered when played and also when defeated, which is nice, but the when defeat effect far less relevant. Blackone is very difficult to use as well because because he's expensive. At the very minimum, whenever you're going to be playing Blackone, you're going to have 1 card in it because you draw 2 cards per turn. You play Blackone, you have to discard 1 card, you draw 3 cards. So you don't really draw 3 cards most of the time, you draw like 2 or 1. That's obviously that's assuming that you really didn't have any cards in hand when you play him. It is just not that easy to use. It doesn't draw that many cards at the end of the day because you have to discard some as well. I think this card has an immense potential, especially if we see at some point some sort of discard synergies that like the equivalent of Madness or some sort of discard based abilities. But for now, is basically not needed. Like I've never felt like the aggro deck needed, and that's also another problem with Cassian Andor has also the same problem. Is like he provides card draw for an aggro deck, but as far as we have experienced, aggro deck don't need draw, they need finishers. That's what they need. So not a card that we need. So right now it's a C tier, but I can see this card becoming a lot stronger in the future. It is probably the worst legendary in the game. Like if you're picking up legendaries, probably Blackone is the worst one to get. Where do we put him? I'm gonna put him under. I'm gonna put it like mid C tier under the System Patrol Craft. It just not that many cases, and obviously 4/4 for 6 is a very bad rate. 6 resources in general is not great. There's also has been another card. The next card on this list has also made a Blackone difficult to justify because there's a far better things to play on the 6 resources tab, and that's obviously the Guerilla attack pod. So Guerilla attack pod, also called the Sabine Fire Spray, because it has the same ability of coming to play ready. All you need basically for this card to come into play ready, so is basically having one of the 2 base having 50 damage on it or more. And that is pretty easy to do in an aggro deck. So this comes into play basically untap and put tremendous amount of pressure on the opponent, as it's obviously going to be attacking for 4 right away. And if you are trying to answer it and you cannot kill it in one shot, it's going to become even bigger with grit and slap you for a ton of damage. So obviously, if you can't kill this guy in one shot, then probably don't try it, because it's incredibly powerful. So we've seen basically Fire Spray, spoiler alert, but it's one of the best cards in the game. So obviously you would think that a Fire Spray in an aggro deck is just would be absolutely insane. But this card is not quite a Fire Spray. There's a couple of very important factors that makes this card not as impactful and a lot easier to answer. First of all, it does have 4 attack and not 5 attacks, which makes a big difference in terms of every damage counts. And the fact this unit has 4 attacks definitely is a big deal, because usually it's going to take one more attacks to seal the deal from the opponent, and that can be a big factor. Another big limitation for this card is the ground unit, of course. It's far easier to interact with ground unit than it is to interact with space units. Your opponent can play like a ground sentinels. It has way more ground units on the battlefield, way more likely to have a unit that has enough attack to kill the Guerilla attack pod. There's just far more things that can be done to interact with the attack pod that makes it so he's not going to deal the full damage that he's supposed to. So those two major differences made Guerilla attack pod significantly worse than Fed Fire Spray. Like, with all that being said, it remains an amazing card, a very unique effect. It is exactly the 6-drop that the aggro decks are looking for. It is also Rebel Heroism, and it is not the best finisher that aggro has access to, because there's 4 cause I believe in, which we'll talk about soon enough. But it is a very powerful card, and is way well deserving of the HS status. I'm gonna place it between yeah, maybe over Palpatine, between Palpatine's Force Choke. It's a very powerful card, but it can be answered. It is easier to interact with than the Fire Spray, and that is a big problem for a card like this, because with a card like this you want something like K2SO that has really inevitability. There's nothing your opponent can really do most of the time, unless he's wailing. I guess wailing is a good answer to K2SO, but there's only very few cards that can really answer K2SO and prevent him from dealing 3 damage, while there's a lot of cards that can prevent Guerilla attack pod from doing its thing. Moving on, we got Mace Window. So Mace Window is not really an aggro card, because we're starting to reach the point anything that costs beyond 6 start to become really difficult for aggro to play, because suddenly the aggro player is going to have to resource beyond what he's comfortable doing. Usually an aggro deck is comfortable resourcing up to 6, so you can play 3 2-drops per turn. But and also of course the Guerilla attack pod. But anything beyond 6 start to become a problem for the deck. So typically I've tried Mace Window in an aggro deck and it didn't really work out so well, because having to resource beyond that is a very big problem for aggro. So the main Mace Window, basically what is great about the card is it comes into play, kills something, and then basically untap, and then he can go attack to the base. That's typically the sequence of play you're going to see from him. Obviously there's things your opponent can do to interrupt this. Once you've done your first ambush, your opponent can play something to kill the unit. So how do we rate Mace Window? So Mace Window is, in my opinion, part of those 7-drop card that have an immediate impact on the game. It is significantly worse than Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker, in my opinion. But it is, in my opinion, better than Kondoku in a lot of cases. What I like about Mace Window is that obviously, if your opponent has multiple small units, you can just kill, untap, kill, untap, kill, untap, and then go 5 to the base, and still have a body on the battlefield. I think killing something on the ground, 5 damage to the base, and then still be left with a body, that's going to be more powerful than typically the value that you can get from a Kondoku. Of course, it all depends on the situation, but I like my Mace Window a lot. So also very relevant trait is a Force unit. So typically you're going to see Mace Window being played in a deck that I call Jedi Red, which is a Force oriented deck that plays Luke Skywalker. Basically plays Luke Skywalker, Mace Window, all the Force unit, the Obi-Wans, the Yoda, and then he plays card like Fourth Throw, and it binds all things, like all the Force synergies. And it's a pretty good deck. It's a pretty good deck. It's a deck that has done pretty well, and this deck does feature Mace Window. So right now, Mace Window does not see a lot of play simply because red, white decks that are not aggro decks simply do not play very well. And this is one of the major weaknesses of Mace Window. So the major weakness of Kondoku, it was often compared in competition with Darth Vader, and is arguably worse than Darth Vader. While Mace Window has the problem of basically having an effect that doesn't really match what the aggression color wants you to do. The aggression color is very straightforwardly very aggressive oriented, while Mace Window has a tendency to be a little bit more control. So I'm going to place it in B tier just over Kondoku. It's a good card, but my big problem with Mace Window is like there's a disconnect between the color combination and between the card effect and what the color combination wants you to do. But it's a very powerful card. Nonetheless, it sees plays. Once again, Jedi Red. Some people play it in aggro as well. So definitely worthy of the B tier status, and it's undeniably a very powerful card. Next, we got Heroic Sacrifice. So Heroic Sacrifice is the boost that forces you to basically discard the unit at the end, but you get to draw a card. It has been a boost that people have been playing because I think it's the only attack boost with Rebel Assault that allows you to boost your unit as a way to finish the game, and without disturbing your 4 cause I believe in, because it's an Heroism card. It's also a great combo with K2SO. So it's been a card that has been a little bit niche, but in the right situation it is pretty good. Right now, I think if you're playing yellow, you prefer to play Surprise Strike, but this can be played on top of Surprise Strike, I guess. So if you need more copies of like boost that can, the fact that you have to kill your own units is a huge downside, and this is why you really want to play this typically as a finisher. And the +2/+0 is nice, but not as good as certain other things. So I think Rebel Assault has mostly taken the spot of Heroic Sacrifice in a lot of aggro decks, at least all the aggro decks that play green. And now you even start seeing people playing Rebel Assault in decks that do not play green, just as a 3 resources boost spell, because for a finisher, the resource cost doesn't matter so much. In any case, it's a niche option, but it is a good option nevertheless. So I'm gonna place this in C tier. It is definitely playable, but it is more of a situational card. I'm gonna place this under Repair, but over Bike Pursuer. I think that's a fine place for it. Next, we got Carabas. So Carabas is a sort of a removal spell. The idea is you need to have damage unit, and you pay 2, and then you can deal damage to unit +1. Basically, this card is very situational. So we've rated it binds all things, which once again is the same concept of having to have damaged units and then redirect that damage, and then it binds all things is slightly better because it heals, but it requires a force unit to work. Carabas does not require a force unit, which makes it arguably easier to use. And another cool thing about Carabas is that it deals the damage +1. That means that even if you have nothing to heal, let's say you just have a unit on the battlefield, you can still play Carabas for 1 and deal 1 damage to something. So it has a bit more use. It's a bit easier to use. It's less powerful in the context of a control deck, of a force deck, but it is easier to use. With that being said, I still have not encountered many decks that want to be playing that kind of effect. So to me, it is going to be rated relatively low. So it's going to be C tier, sorry. Where do we put it? Okay, I'm just going to put it just right over It Binds All Things. They're very similar cards. It's, as I said, really what saves this card in a sense. Otherwise, it would probably be D tier, is the fact you can play it just to ping something for 1. And it's also a Spectre card. You can play it in your Spectre deck, even though I don't see any reason why you would want to do this specifically for a Spectre deck, but it is worth noticing. Okay, last but not least, we got a card called For a Cause I Believe In. And this is my least favorite card in the set. Actually, it's a card that I actively hate. I don't understand how the designer came up with something like this, to be quite honest. It is a card that I found to be extremely unfun to play against, but also very unfun to play with. I can forgive certain cards for being not fun to play against if they are fun at least to play with, but this is when I win with this card I feel dirty. When I lose against this card I feel frustrated. It is a card that is very low interaction. You pay 3, you deal 4 damage to the opponent, between 3 and 4 damage to the opponent. There's nothing the opponent can do about it. And also icing on the cake, I would say, is that you get to reveal the top card of your deck and then you put them back in any order. That means that you can basically look for more copies of For a Cause I Believe In and put them on stack, so you can chain For a Cause and then For a Cause and then For a Cause and finish your game like this. It is just a card that also has a negative impact on the meta, because basically it forces cards that control decks to have healing. If you're playing a control deck and you don't play blue, you can't play. Like I used to play Vader green for a very long time, and this deck is a very powerful control deck, but it has one weakness, is like it doesn't have any reliable way to heal, and because of that, it's not really a playable deck in the meta, because you just lose to For a Cause I Believe In. And stabilizing the board is not enough. The opponent is just going to deal to them. And I truly believe, honestly, that I control. There's a lot of finishers which I'm completely okay with. Like, for example, Gary Attack Pod is a finisher, which is an excellent finisher, an excellent card. But at least it can be interacted with. This cannot be interacted with. It's just a very annoying card. Um, well, so outside of my hatred for this card, it is obviously an S tier card. It is the reason I'm gonna rate this. Damn, it's a crazy card. So I'm definitely rating this over Darth Vader. I think it has more impact on the meta that Darth Vader has. Uh, I'm gonna rate this over. Yeah, I'm gonna put this in second position here. I'm gonna rate this over Super Laser Technician. This card has such a massive impact on the meta. Uh, it's a card that is basically, another thing I don't like about this card is that because this card exists, and if you're an aggressive card but you're not white, you don't see any play, because if you do not synergize with For a Cause I Believe In, you're out of the game. And in order to make For a Cause I Believe In reliable, people usually play they like to play between 44 and 47 heroic card in their deck. So there's going to be typically only 1 or 2 cards in your deck that can afford to not have the heroism aspect. So it's also a card that restricts your deck building options a lot as an aggro deck, because you have to play this card. It's just that good. So yeah, a card that is obviously incredibly powerful, simply because it does something that no other card in the game can do. It's the ultimate finisher. And it is obviously the reason why red white is such an aggressive card. So it's such a powerful aggressive color. So here goes. This is basically our red white list. As you can see, we got 2 S tier, a couple of A tier, 3 A tiers, and some B tier. So a very solid color overall. And what is very powerful about red white is that everything goes in the same deck, almost, except Mace Window. Everything goes in the same deck, and that's what makes this color so strong. Anyway, we'll see you next time, where we're going to talk about the mono aggression card. And until then, if you have any disagreement, please comment on the comment below. And see you next time.